She showed up in a wedding dress with mascara running down her cheeks. He handed her a wrench instead of a question. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The clouds had been threatening all afternoon, but when the rain finally came, it didn't just fall. It poured. Thick sheets of water hammered the tin roof of Caleb's garage, filling the air with the relentless drumming of a summer storm breaking loose. Inside, the familiar scent of motor oil, wet concrete, and fresh coffee grounded him in the ordinary. He stood hunched over a rusted Chevy pickup, the kind of work that didn't ask questions, didn't judge, and didn't care if you were behind on rent or nursing old wounds. Then came the slam of car doors and hurried footsteps, heels, not boots, echoing down the gravel drive. Caleb looked up, confused. Nobody in their right mind came out this far during weather like this, not unless something was wrong. And then he saw her, soaked to the bone, lace dragging in the mud, mascara streaked across porcelain skin like war paint. A wedding dress clung to her like it didn't want to let go, and her breath came in short, sharp bursts. Her heels slipped on the gravel as she reached the shelter of the overhang, arms crossed tight across her chest, though whether from cold or shame he couldn't tell. Caleb didn't speak right away. There was a fragility to her, not the fragile kind that breaks, but the kind that explodes if pressed too hard. "Something I can help with?" he asked, voice low, even. She glanced at him, startled. Her makeup had begun to run, but her eyes were sharp beneath the chaos. "My car broke down," she said, as if that were the only truth she could offer. He gestured toward the bay without a word, stepping aside so she could pass. She hesitated, then moved with the unsteady grace of someone running on adrenaline and sheer will. Inside, the light flickered overhead. Caleb grabbed a clean towel from the back shelf and handed it to her. She took it silently, pressing it against her face, her hands trembling just enough to be noticed. "I'm Caleb," he said. She swallowed. "Evelyn." He nodded, then glanced out toward the dark sedan abandoned on the shoulder, blinkers still pulsing through the rain. She wasn't just escaping a breakdown. She was fleeing a life that had locked her into something she didn't choose. And somehow, without planning to, Caleb had just become her detour. The towel soaked through quickly, no match for the rain still dripping from the ends of her hair. Evelyn stood near the heater, arms wrapped around herself, the white of her dress now speckled with dirt and streaks of road grime. Mud clung to the hem like it was trying to drag her back. Caleb watched her from the workbench, saying nothing. Some people talk to fill silence. Others need the silence first to remember how to breathe. She didn't look up, just stared at the space heater like it owed her something. Eventually, her voice broke through the room, soft but brittle. "I couldn't do it." Caleb didn't ask what. He figured she'd tell him when she was ready. She sank into one of the shop's old metal chairs, the dress pooling awkwardly around her. The flowers were white, the napkins were monogrammed, there were doves. "Actual doves," she said, almost laughing. "And I was supposed to walk down that aisle like I wasn't dying inside." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, giving her the kind of quiet that didn't pressure. "I kept waiting for it to feel right," she continued, "but it never did. I thought maybe I'd just be nervous, but then I saw myself in the mirror, not as a bride, just as someone pretending." Caleb nodded slightly, still silent. "And when I stepped outside to get some air, she said, I kept walking, down the steps, past the valet, through the garden. No one followed, not right away. They were probably too busy fluffing tablecloths." Her eyes finally met his. "I wasn't late. I was leaving." There it was. Not a story about cold feet or a tantrum over seating charts. It was something heavier, a decision made quietly in her own bones, not because she was afraid, but because she was done lying. Caleb exhaled through his nose, slow and steady. "Guess that car of yours knew it was time to quit, too." That surprised a smile out of her, just barely. "Maybe it did," she said, voice a little steadier. Maybe we both broke down on purpose. The storm outside had settled into a steady rhythm, tapping softly against the garage windows like it was trying to be polite now. Caleb poured 2 cups of black coffee from the old thermos he kept by the sink. It wasn't gourmet, but it was hot, and he figured that mattered more than flavor at the moment. He handed her one without a word, and she took it with both hands, her fingers cold and stiff. For a while, neither of them said much. The radio played low in the background, some classic rock song that had outlived its era, but not its truth. Evelyn stared into the steam curling from her cup like she was waiting to find herself in it. "You can use the bathroom through that door," Caleb offered quietly. "There's a dryer, too, if you want to warm up your clothes." She nodded, grateful but slow-moving, like she wasn't sure the kindness was real yet. When she returned, her cheeks had some color, and her dress was draped over a chair to dry. Caleb didn't comment on the fact that she was now wearing one of his flannel work shirts. The sleeves rolled up past her elbows. It looked comically big on her, but somehow it made her look more real. He cleared his throat. "You got a name?" She hesitated just a second too long. Then, with a small sigh, "Evelyn." He nodded. "Nice to meet you, Evelyn." She managed a faint smile. "Likewise. Caleb, was it?" "Yep." She took another sip of coffee, then let the silence stretch before breaking it again. "I was supposed to be getting married today, to Blake Whitmore. Maybe you've heard of him. Real estate empire. Yacht guy." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Can't say I get invited to those kinds of weddings?" She snorted softly. "Good. You didn't miss anything." He leaned back against the counter, letting her words settle between them. Not many people would leave a multi-million-dollar wedding in a dress and heels, let alone end up in a dusty garage drinking black coffee with a stranger. But Evelyn had. And Caleb could already tell. She wasn't running away. She was waking up. The rain had eased into a mist by the time Caleb grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. Evelyn's car sat just beyond the gravel edge of the lot, its sleek body now speckled with dirt and rain, hazard lights still blinking in a tired rhythm. It was the kind of machine you didn't often see in a place like this. Low-slung, imported, clearly expensive. But right now, it looked as out of place as Evelyn herself had when she first walked in. He popped the hood and gave a low whistle. "Figures," he muttered, eyes scanning the engine. It wasn't neglect or bad luck. Someone had left the battery just loose enough to rattle free. Probably the driver. Probably intentional. Back inside, Evelyn sat with the coffee cradled in her hands like it was the only warm thing left in her world. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag and gave her a look. "Your driver bail on you?" Her lips twitched, but not into a smile. "He was loyal. Just not to me." Caleb let that sit. Loyalty in her world probably had a price tag. Here, it was measured in who'd show up at 2 a.m. with a flashlight and a tow chain. He motioned toward the window. "You want me to get it started?" She shook her head, firm. "No, let it sit. I don't want to go back to that life just because the car starts working again." He watched her, curious. There was something deeper than frustration in her voice. It was resolve. That car wasn't just transportation, it was a gilded leash. And now that it wouldn't start, she could breathe. "You ever think maybe it stopped for a reason?" he asked, half joking. Evelyn looked at him, not with surprise, but something closer to recognition. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think maybe it gave me a head start." Caleb leaned against the wall again, nodding slowly. The car might have stalled, but Evelyn hadn't. She'd stepped out of it, lace trailing in the mud, and walked straight into a future she hadn't even imagined yet. The storm didn't come back that night, but the cold settled in like it planned to stay. Caleb brought out an old space heater and cleared off the cot in the back office, the one he used on long nights when an engine couldn't wait until morning. He didn't ask Evelyn what her plan was, didn't push for answers or a timeline. She needed a place to disappear, and he had one. "I've slept worse places," she said, eyeing the cot with a faint smirk. Caleb shrugged. beats the back seat of a broken car. She pulled the flannel shirt tighter around her and sat down, legs curled beneath her. He handed her a fresh blanket and reached for a small bottle of whiskey he kept tucked behind the shop manuals. Didn't offer it with ceremony, just poured 2 fingers into a couple of mismatched mugs and passed one her way. "To broken things," he said, raising his. Evelyn clinked her mug against his gently. "And the ones who fix them." The first sip burned, but in a good way. She let it settle, her eyes drifting to the tools on the wall, the spare parts lining the shelves, the calendar with its oil-stained corners. It was a life so different from hers that it almost felt fictional, and yet she found comfort in it, in the mess, in the silence. "You always this quiet?" she asked. Caleb took another sip, only when there's nothing worth interrupting. She laughed, soft and real this time. It caught her off guard. He nodded toward the corner. "There's a toolbox over there. If the cot collapses, we can rebuild it by morning." Evelyn smiled into her cup. "You're not what I expected." "Good," he said. "Neither are you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It felt like a breath between chapters. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the heater and the slow melting of fear into warmth, a wall she didn't know she had began to crack. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn didn't feel like she had to run. The morning light broke through the garage windows in soft strips, casting pale gold across the concrete floor. Evelyn sat on the edge of the cot, sipping the last of the coffee Caleb had made. Black and far too strong, but it did the job. Her dress still hung over the back of a folding chair, dry now but wrinkled, and speckled with reminders of yesterday. She didn't care, not anymore. Caleb was already at work beneath the hood of a battered Ford that had seen better decades. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands stained with grease, and he looked more at home than anyone Evelyn had ever known. He didn't look at her like she was a problem to solve, or worse, a project to fix. She wandered closer, the floor cool beneath her bare feet. Her designer boots sat abandoned near the cot, caked in dried mud. In her world, shoes like that were currency. Here, they were just heavy. "Morning," she said softly. Caleb glanced over his shoulder. "Sleep okay?" She nodded. "Better than expected. Coffee help?" "Barely, but I'll take it." He smiled faintly and went back to work. She watched him for a while, the way his hands moved with certainty. Like nothing about this job confused him, like there was no room for ego, no time for masks, just tools and truth. "You never asked," she said after a beat. "Asked what?" "Who I was, where I came from, why I ran." Caleb straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag. "Didn't seem like it was mine to ask." That stopped her. "Everyone else I've ever met either wants something or wants to fix me," she said. "You didn't even flinch when I told you I left a millionaire at the altar." He looked at her then, not impressed, not intimidated, just steady. "Maybe that's because I don't care who you were with," he said, "only care who you are now." The words hit her deeper than she expected. No pity, no awe, just acceptance. And for the first time in years, she could breathe. The scent of oil and coffee lingered in the air as morning settled in fully. Caleb leaned against the garage's open bay door, biting into a cold biscuit from the diner down the road. Evelyn sat at the workbench across from him, flipping through an old car manual she couldn't understand, mostly to keep her hands busy. It had been less than 12 hours since she walked into his life, soaked and shaking, but it already felt like the silence between them had its own kind of rhythm. Then the radio crackled to life. Caleb had left it tuned to a local station for weather updates and occasional rock ballads, but this time the morning DJ's voice cut through with something sharper, something too polished. Evelyn barely heard the words at first, but her name, rang out like a gunshot in a quiet field. Breaking news: heiress Evelyn Carrington disappears hours before walking down the aisle in what was being called the wedding of the decade. Sources say guests were stunned when the bride failed to appear, sparking a media frenzy and speculation about the sudden disappearance. Caleb's biscuit froze halfway to his mouth. Evelyn slowly turned toward the radio, her body tensing as the DJ went on about her family, her father's empire, her groom's lavish preparations, all the parts of the life she'd stepped out of in heels and a storm. They even mentioned the car. The driver found it empty. No note, no explanation, just gone. Caleb reached out and lowered the volume, not fully turning it off. She let out a shaky breath. Well, there it is. He studied her carefully. You okay? No, she said, then paused. But I'm here. Caleb didn't offer comfort he didn't know how to give. He just nodded, steady. You're safe. Evelyn looked at the small radio, the cracked speaker, the static creeping in under the news. Then she looked back at Caleb, the man who didn't ask, didn't flinch, didn't care about headlines. I really screwed things up, didn't I? He shook his head once. You walked out. That's not screwing up. That's starting over. The radio was silent now, its volume turned down low, but the echo of Evelyn's name still lingered in the corners of the garage like smoke that wouldn't clear. She hadn't said much since the headline broke, just sat quietly, letting the truth of her escape settle into something real. Caleb didn't push. He just kept working, letting the steady rhythm of socket wrenches and grease-stained rags fill the space. Eventually, she stood up, wiping her palms on the thighs of Caleb's borrowed flannel like she needed to do something, anything, with her hands. I need to pay you, she said, voice soft but certain. Caleb didn't look up. For what? For letting me stay, for not asking questions, for all of this. He tightened a bolt, then glanced her way. I don't take money for being decent. Evelyn crossed her arms, frustration flickering behind her eyes. It's not about charity, it's about fairness. You gave me shelter, privacy. You didn't sell me out. You should be compensated. Caleb finally looked at her, eyes calm. You want to square things with me? She nodded slowly. Then grab a rag. I've got an oil change waiting, and Jimmy's Civic is leaking like it's been shot. She blinked. You're offering me a job? Best way to pay your debt is earn your keep. I've got more work than hands around here, and you don't strike me as someone who wants to sit still. Evelyn stared at him, stunned. No one had ever offered her something without an agenda, not without knowing who her father was or what connections she could offer. But Caleb didn't care about her last name. He didn't need her resume or her resume-worthy life. He just needed someone willing to work. She stepped closer. You're serious? He handed her a rag. I don't joke about engines or fairness. A slow smile tugged at her lips, almost involuntarily. For the first time in days, she felt something close to grounded. I don't know the first thing about cars, she admitted. Caleb smirked. Then it's a good thing you're starting at the bottom. The first thing Evelyn learned about cars wasn't technical. It was that grease gets everywhere. Her hands, her arms, somehow even her collarbone. No amount of careful movements or rolled-up sleeves kept it from finding her. And yet, standing under the hood of an ancient Civic, with Caleb guiding her step by step, she didn't mind it as much as she thought she would. Okay, he said, handing her a socket wrench. This one's a 3/8. Loosen that bolt right there, counterclockwise. She took the tool and squinted at the bolt, fingers unsure. Are we absolutely certain this thing isn't going to explode? Caleb smirked. Not unless you hit the radio and the airbag at the same time while humming the national anthem. She rolled her eyes, but the joke loosened her nerves. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the wrench, feeling the give as the bolt finally loosened. Something about that tiny click echoed louder than she expected. That's it, he said. Now you're dangerous. She looked down at her oil-streaked hands, then back at the open engine. It was strange how something so unfamiliar could already feel a little less intimidating. For so long, Her world had been about perfection, polished nails, crisp schedules, zero tolerance for error. Now she stood in boots 2 sizes too big, fingers blackened with grit, and for the first time in years, no one was watching for her to fail. Over the next hour, she learned what a carburetor did, what a spark plug looked like, and how not to panic when the socket wrench slipped and banged her knuckles. "You'll get calluses soon," Caleb said, rinsing his hands off. "Means you're earning it." She flexed her sore fingers, smiling. "It kind of hurts. Means it's working." Later, when she caught her reflection in the garage's dusty window, smudged, sweaty, wild hair escaping her ponytail, she didn't see the heiress anymore. She saw someone real, someone learning. Underneath all the silk and expectation, Evelyn was starting to find something she'd never had before. Herself. The slam of a car door was the only warning. Caleb looked up from under the lifted hood of a pickup, wiping his hands on a rag just in time to see the sleek black luxury sedan kick up dust in the driveway. The man who stepped out wore money like a uniform, tailored coat, polished shoes, and a storm brewing behind expensive sunglasses. He moved like someone who expected doors to open without knocking. Evelyn stepped out from the garage's back room, mid-laugh from something Caleb had said. The moment she saw him, the color drained from her face, but only for a second. She didn't retreat. She stood taller. "Blake?" she said evenly, slowly. He ripped off the sunglasses, eyes narrowed. "There you are. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Caleb straightened beside her, subtly positioning himself between them, wiping his hands slowly. He didn't say anything, but his stance said enough. Blake's gaze flicked over him with contempt. "This your mechanic now? Cute." Evelyn didn't blink. "This is Caleb. He helped me when no one else did." "You humiliated me," Blake snapped. "You embarrassed both our families. I had to explain to everyone why the Carrington heiress vanished into thin air." "I didn't vanish," she said. "I walked away. There's a difference." Caleb's eyes stayed on Blake, still silent. He didn't need to defend her. She was doing just fine on her own. Blake stepped forward, face red. "You think this is how you find yourself? Playing grease monkey in some backwoods shop with a guy who probably lives paycheck to paycheck?" Caleb's jaw twitched, but he didn't move. Evelyn did. She stepped in front of Caleb this time. "You're not mad because I left," she said. "You're mad because I didn't ask permission." For a moment the air froze. Blake stood there, seething, but something in her voice had shifted. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't unsure. She was done. Blake scoffed, turned, and stormed back to his car, tires spinning as he peeled away. Caleb looked at her quietly. "You okay?" Evelyn exhaled. "I think I finally am." By the end of the week, the garage stayed busy, but not just with engines. Customers came with slow leaks and suspicious squeaks, but their eyes lingered longer than usual, and their smiles held just a touch too much curiosity. Maple Ridge wasn't a town that needed much to talk about, and a runaway bride working in Caleb's shop, that was more than enough to fuel the fire. At the diner, the waitresses whispered over coffee pots. At the gas station, folks tilted their heads when Evelyn walked past in her oversized flannel and oil-stained jeans. They weren't cruel, not exactly, just observant. And in a town where everybody knew everybody, someone new, especially someone wrapped in mystery, became entertainment by default. Evelyn noticed, of course. She wasn't naive. She caught the glances, the half-hushed greetings, the polite smiles that quickly faded once her back was turned, but she didn't flinch, not this time. "Looks like word's out," she said one afternoon, leaning on the counter beside Caleb as he organized receipts. He glanced up without much reaction. "This town gossips when someone paints their porch a new color. You think they weren't going to talk about you?" She chuckled. "Do they think I'm crazy?" "Some do. Some think it's romantic. Others just want to know if you're staying." She looked out the garage door at the road beyond, her voice soft. "I don't even know that yet." Caleb nodded. You've got time to decide. But if they're going to talk, might as well give 'em something worth saying." She looked at him, amused. "Like what?" "Like how the runaway bride fixed Mrs. Dawson's transmission yesterday with nothing but a socket, wrench, and stubbornness." That made her laugh, real and full. For a moment, the whispers didn't matter. The stares didn't matter. All that mattered was the grit under her nails and the man beside her who saw her as more than a headline. In a town where rumors moved faster than wind, Evelyn was becoming something rarer, part of the story, not just the subject of it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with the kind of precision that only money could buy. It arrived in the hands of a man in a stiff suit far too polished for Maple Ridge. He stepped into the garage like he'd stepped onto the wrong movie set, eyeing the grease-stained floor and humming machinery with mild discomfort. "Evelyn Carrington?" he asked, his voice clipped and formal. She turned from the tool rack, wiping her hands on a rag, face unreadable. "That's me." The man extended the envelope like it might bite him. "From your father. I was instructed to deliver it personally." Caleb watched from across the garage, setting down his wrench, but not stepping in. He didn't have to. Evelyn straightened, took the envelope, and thanked the man without emotion. The lawyer nodded stiffly and left as quickly as he came, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete. She didn't open it right away, just stared at it, her thumb brushing the embossed initials on the flap. Finally, she sat on the workbench and slid a finger under the seal. The letter inside was short. No greeting, no warmth. Just a cold command on thick stationery. "Come home immediately. This rebellion ends now. Otherwise, the trust is revoked. The Carrington name will not be dragged through the mud. You have 48 hours. No signature. No love, Dad. Just the threat of exile and the price tag attached." She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the bench beside her like it was something sharp. Caleb walked over, his voice quiet. "Bad news?" She looked up at him, eyes steady. "He's offering me a choice." Caleb leaned on the bench beside her. "What's the catch?" "If I don't come back, I lose everything I've ever been promised." "And if you do?" "I lose who I'm becoming." They sat there for a moment, surrounded by the familiar buzz of work and weather and old machines. The kind of place where no one cared about legacies. Evelyn picked up the letter, then tossed it in the nearby trash can. "That's not my life anymore." The days stretched longer as summer took hold, the kind of warmth that made sweat bead on your neck before noon and turned the garage into a humming, sun-soaked rhythm of motion. Engines groaned, tools clinked, fans hummed from corners, and in the middle of it all, Evelyn moved with growing confidence, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, grease under her nails, and a focus in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She didn't just stay, she settled. Not with a suitcase or a declaration, but with the way she started showing up before Caleb did. Coffee in hand, sleeves already pushed up. She asked questions, real ones, not out of politeness, but hunger. She learned the difference between a busted alternator and a faulty fuel pump. She got the hang of reading customers, not their wallets, but their stories. And when no one was looking, she'd hum to herself while organizing bolts by size or wiping down a workbench. It was the kind of thing she never did in her old life. There, her voice had to be careful. Here, it could be anything. Caleb noticed, not just in the way she worked, but in the way she spoke. One afternoon, a customer questioned her diagnosis, tried to talk past her like she was just a pretty face playing dress-up. Evelyn didn't flinch. She stepped forward, voice clear, steady. "You've got a vacuum leak. I can prove it. But if you'd rather wait an extra hour to hear it from a man, that's your choice." The man blinked, muttered something, and stepped back. Caleb watched from across the shop, a slow grin tugging at his mouth. Later, as the day wound down and the light turned golden through the garage windows, Evelyn stood with her hands on her hips, covered in sweat and grease, and something else. Pride. She didn't need a mansion or a press release. She had found something louder than headlines and more permanent than diamonds. Her voice. And in Caleb's garage, among tools and silence and the scent of oil and effort, she was finally using it. The fair rolled into Maple Ridge like clockwork. Rusty rides, sizzling food stands, and the scent of popcorn mixing with fresh-cut hay. It wasn't anything grand, but to the folks in town, it was tradition. Caleb hadn't gone in years. Too busy, too tired, too uninterested. But when Evelyn mentioned she'd never been to a real fair, he didn't even think twice. "You'll want boots," he said, as they pulled into the grass lot, "unless you feel like wrestling mud." Evelyn looked down at her borrowed sneakers, already dusted with grease from the garage. "I think I've already let go of heels for a while." They walked side by side through rows of booths, where locals sold homemade jam, carved wooden toys, and knitted potholders with crooked hearts. Kids ran wild with sticky fingers, laughter ringing through the air, no cameras, no headlines. Just noise and light and the hum of a simpler world. Evelyn tried fried pickles and nearly cried laughing at how terrible they were. She won a tiny stuffed bear at the ring toss, even though Caleb swore the game was rigged. And when a local band struck up on the main stage, fiddles and banjos and voices rough from too many nights under stars, Caleb reached out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. She hesitated just a second, but the string lights overhead cast a glow that made the whole world feel softer. So she took it. They danced on the grass, not gracefully, not perfectly, but with the kind of ease that made everything else fall away. Evelyn laughed, really laughed, and it wasn't polite or delicate. It was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep, like a pressure valve had finally been released. Caleb spun her once, then pulled her close as the music slowed. "You look happy," he murmured. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think I forgot what that felt like." He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because under the canopy of lights and old fiddle strings, Evelyn wasn't the runaway bride anymore. She was just a girl at a county fair, dancing with the man who made her feel like home. The engine sat on the lift like a challenge, silent and waiting. Caleb stood nearby, arms crossed, watching as Evelyn tightened the final bolt with a determined squint. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from focus. Sweat clung to her temple. A black smear of grease ran along her jaw, where she'd unknowingly wiped her face. She didn't care. They'd spent the last few days going over every part, hoses, plugs, belts. Caleb had guided her step by step, but today he stood back, offering only silence. It was her job now, her test. Evelyn double-checked the last connection, wiped her hands on a rag, and nodded. "Okay," she said, exhaling. "Moment of truth." Caleb gave her a slight grin. "Fire it up." She slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. For a second, nothing. Then the engine rumbled to life, smooth and steady. Not a cough, not a sputter, just power. Real, earned power. Her eyes went wide. She jumped out, staring at it like it had just spoken. "Did I really just—" "You did," Caleb said, walking over. "Clean job. Solid work." She looked at him, a grin tugging at the corner of her lips. "You mean it?" He nodded. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn." The words stopped her, not because they were unexpected, but because no one had ever said them without a price. Not her parents, not her teachers, not the polished people at all those polished parties. Proud was a currency, a performance note. But this, Caleb's voice was steady, his eyes honest. He wasn't impressed, he was proud. Evelyn's face broke into a smile so bright it lit the entire garage. She laughed, a quiet, disbelieving sound. "I fixed an engine." "You did more than that," Caleb said. She nodded slowly, still staring at the car. Her hands were raw, her jeans were ruined, and her heart felt steadier than it had in years. Because for once, she hadn't been handed something. She'd earned it. The sky was bruising with twilight when Evelyn found Caleb on the back steps of the garage, nursing a chipped mug of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. The air was quiet, heavy with the kind of stillness that only small towns knew after sundown. She sat beside him, arms wrapped around her knees, not saying anything at first. They watched the sky fade together, the silence stretched and easy, until it wasn't. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. Caleb didn't look at her. "Sure. Why don't you date anyone?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he let out a slow breath and took another sip. "I did," he said. "Once." Evelyn turned slightly toward him, but didn't speak. "Her name was Natalie. We were supposed to get married. Had the date picked, rings paid off in monthly installments. I was working double shifts just to keep up. Thought that would be enough." His voice wasn't bitter, just tired. "But it turns out love doesn't stretch as far as a bank account." Evelyn's stomach turned. "She left because of money?" "She left because I couldn't offer more than this." He motioned to the garage, the cracked cement, the battered tools and flickering lights. "She said she wanted a life without limits. I think I was a little too grounded for her dreams." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Caleb finally looked at her. "I'm not." His eyes held something she hadn't seen before. A crack in his calm. Not regret exactly, more like the quiet ache of someone who once bet everything on love and lost without bitterness, but also without forgetting. "That's why I didn't ask your story, Pope," he added. "Because I know what it feels like to be judged before you even open your mouth." Evelyn reached over and placed her hand lightly on his. He didn't pull away. In that moment something shifted, not because of romance or timing, but because two broken pieces recognized each other not as damage, but as understanding. The letter came on a Thursday, folded neatly into a pale blue envelope, and tucked beneath the front door of the garage like it had arrived quietly, trying not to startle anyone. Evelyn spotted it on her way back from the parts shop, her name handwritten across the front in delicate cursive she hadn't seen in years. She stood at the threshold, holding it for a moment before slipping it into her back pocket. Caleb noticed, but didn't ask. He had a way of letting questions breathe. It wasn't until late evening, after the last customer had left and the tools had been put away, that she opened it. Sitting on the cot in the back office, the same one she'd first collapsed onto in her wedding dress weeks ago, the note inside was short. No lecture, no scolding. "Evelyn, I miss you. No pressure, no expectations. Just lunch, if you're ready. Love, Mom." She read it 3 times. It felt foreign, gentle, almost fragile. Her mother had always been poised, proper, impossible to please. But this was the closest she'd ever come to an open door. Later, she found Caleb in the garage, elbow deep in the engine of a minivan that had seen too many summers. She leaned against the wall, arms folded, letter still in hand. "My mother wrote," she said quietly. He didn't stop working, just glanced over his shoulder. "Yeah?" "Said she wants me to come to lunch. Said there's no pressure." Evelyn gave a soft, breathy laugh. That might be the first time she said that to me in my entire life. Caleb wiped his hands and straightened up. "You going?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me's still tired." "You don't owe anyone forgiveness," he said. "But if it gives you peace, maybe it's worth hearing her out." Evelyn looked down at the letter, thumb brushing over her mother's signature. For the first time, the idea of going back didn't feel like surrender. It felt like choice. And that made all the difference. The old truck coughed once, twice, then gave up entirely with a pitiful sputter just outside the diner parking lot. Caleb popped the hood and stared at the engine like a man betrayed. The truck was a relic, more rust than metal in some spots, but it had always started, always. Until today. Evelyn leaned against the passenger door, sipping iced tea from a to-go cup, watching him with one eyebrow raised. You want me to call a tow, or should I just start pushing? Caleb sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It's probably the starter, maybe the solenoid. She's stubborn, but she's never died on me like this. Evelyn stepped forward, peered into the engine. Mind if I take a look? He hesitated, not because he doubted her, not anymore, but because this truck was personal. It had been with him through breakups, late-night emergencies, quiet drives through back roads that helped him think. But then he stepped aside. Be my guest. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves, grabbed the wrench from the toolbox in the truck bed, and got to work. She moved with confidence now, still careful, but sure. She checked the battery, jiggled the connection, crawled under the frame to look at the starter, her voice echoing up as she called for Caleb to try the ignition. Nothing. She emerged, smudged and grinning. Okay, it's not the starter. It's your wiring. You've got corrosion on the connection. I can fix it. 15 minutes. Caleb blinked. You sure? She gave him a look. Do you want your truck running or not? True to her word, 15 minutes later, the engine turned over with a roar and a little puff of smoke. Caleb stood there, arms crossed, watching her with something deeper than pride. Maybe admiration, maybe awe. First time I've ever let someone else fix her, he said. Evelyn leaned against the hood, wiping her hands. First time I've fixed something that mattered. He looked at her, eyes warm. You've been doing that since the day you walked in. The engine idled behind them, steady, strong, just like her. The reporter showed up on a Tuesday, stepping into the garage in polished shoes and a blazer far too clean for Maple Ridge. He was polite, professional, and didn't waste time. I'm looking for Evelyn Carrington, he said. I believe she works here now? Evelyn stood by the workbench, holding a socket wrench in one hand and a drip pan in the other. Her hair was tied back, a streak of oil across her cheek. She didn't flinch. I'm Evelyn, she said calmly. The man blinked, caught off guard by how different she looked from the woman on the gossip sites. I'd love to sit down with you, talk about why you left, what you've found. The world wants to hear your side. She set down the tools, wiping her hands. I'll do it, but on one condition. He leaned in, curious. You tell the real story, she said, not about dresses or drama, about what happens when someone chooses peace over pressure, and you include him. She motioned to Caleb, who was pretending not to eavesdrop from under a lifted SUV. The reporter raised an eyebrow. Your boyfriend? My anchor, she replied. He didn't rescue me. He didn't try to fix me. He just let me be, and that's what saved me. They sat on the back porch of the garage that evening, Evelyn speaking with clarity she hadn't had months ago. She talked about leaving the wedding, about finding value in scraped knuckles instead of designer gowns, and about learning what it meant to choose her life rather than perform one. But she spoke most about Caleb, how he never once asked who she used to be, how his quiet, steady presence reminded her she didn't need to earn worth, she already had it. The article ran 3 days later. The headline read, The Heiress Who Left It All, and the Mechanic Who Showed Her Why. The internet buzzed. Social media lit up. But in Maple Ridge, not much changed. The engine noise kept humming, and Evelyn kept showing up at the garage, sleeves rolled, smile real. Because this time, she told the story. The Carrington estate hadn't changed. The hedges were still trimmed with surgical precision, the fountain still burbled with too much effort, and the front doors still opened like they expected applause. Evelyn stood on the marble steps, her boots coated in a layer of Maple Ridge dust, hair pulled into a loose braid, a faded denim jacket hugging her shoulders. This time she hadn't come with luggage, just confidence. Her mother answered the door herself, something unheard of. She blinked in surprise, then quickly smoothed her expression. Evelyn? Hi, Mom. They hugged briefly, awkwardly, a gesture more out of memory than warmth. Lunch was served in the garden, linen tablecloth, crystal glasses, a salad too delicate to fill anyone. Her father arrived late, crisp as ever, his tie like armor. He barely looked at her plate, eyes scanning her face instead. "You've been working in a garage?" he asked, the word garage sounding like a slur. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Yes, fixing engines, learning things I was never taught to value." Her mother sipped tea. "So the articles were true." "They were mine," Evelyn said. "I told the story myself. No one twisted anything." Her father frowned. "And what is your plan? To stay in that town forever?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But for the first time, it's my decision, not yours, not anyone else's." Silence stretched, the kind that usually made Evelyn shift in her seat, but not today. She held their gaze. "You seem different," her mother said finally. "I am different," she replied. "I found out who I am when no one was watching." They didn't know what to say to that. Their daughter, always polished, always posed, now unapologetically real. When the meal ended, Evelyn stood, kissed her mother's cheek, shook her father's hand. No yelling, no scenes, just quiet clarity. As she walked away from the mansion, heels replaced with worn boots, she didn't look back. For once, her parents were the ones watching her leave, unsure, uneasy, and maybe, just maybe, a little proud. Maple Ridge had never been a town that welcomed change easily. It thrived on routine, on knowing who people were and where they belonged. So when Evelyn Carrington, runaway bride, heiress, magazine headline, started working full-time at Caleb's garage, opinions flared like sparks on a welding line. At the diner, some called her brave, said she'd traded diamonds for dignity, said maybe she was exactly what the town needed, proof that people could choose different. But others weren't so generous. "She's just slumming it," one man muttered over his coffee. "Playing mechanic until the novelty wears off." "I give it 2 weeks before she's back in some penthouse," another added. Caleb heard the whispers, so did Evelyn. They followed her in the grocery store, in church pews, even at the gas station when she filled the truck's tank and wiped down the windshield like she'd done it her whole life. But she never snapped back, never corrected them. She just kept showing up, sleeves rolled, hands stained, heart steady. Caleb didn't say much about the noise, but his silence was a shield. He stood beside her in the shop, never wavering. When people stared too long or muttered loud enough to be heard, he'd meet their eyes, not angry, just unshaken, as if to say, "She belongs here, same as anyone else." One evening, as they closed up the shop, Evelyn paused at the door. "Do you think they'll ever believe I'm not pretending?" she asked. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "Does it matter if they don't?" She considered that, then shook her head. "No, I guess it doesn't." He reached for the lights, flipping the switch. "Then don't waste time proving. Just keep doing." The garage fell into darkness behind them as they stepped outside, the sky fading into shades of deep blue. The town might be split, but Evelyn wasn't. She wasn't here to win approval. She was here to build something real, and that was enough. The idea started like most good things do, quietly, over late-night coffee and the low hum of a cooling engine. Caleb was sketching something on a scrap of cardboard, and Evelyn sat across from him, absently cleaning her fingernails with a flathead screwdriver. The garage was still, the kind of silence that only comes when the work is done and the world is finally catching its breath. "You know," she said, "you've got all this space out back. That dusty storage room with the busted light and half a dozen tires no one's claimed in years." Caleb glanced up. "Yeah? What if we used it?" she continued. "Cleared it out? Put in workbenches? Taught girls how to fix things, engines, brakes, confidence." He raised a brow, intrigued. "Girls?" "No offense," she said with a smirk, "but guys get handed tools. Girls get told to sit still and stay clean." Caleb leaned back, the wheels turning. "You think there'd be interest?" Evelyn nodded. "I've had 3 moms ask me this week if I'd show their daughters how to change a tire. One of them said her kid wants to rebuild a lawnmower. There's curiosity. What there isn't, yet, is a place where they're allowed to learn." He tapped the edge of the cardboard. No judgment, no ego. No, boys, she added with a grin. At least not until the girls know more than they do. They laughed, but the idea stuck. The next day they cleared the back room, swept out cobwebs, hauled away scrap. By week's end, Caleb had sketched blueprints, and Evelyn had started a list of tools they'd need. They called it the wrench room. No frills, just space to learn, mess up, and try again. It wasn't just about engines, it was about power. The kind that comes when your hands know what to do and your voice doesn't hesitate. It was a risk, sure, but they'd both taken bigger ones for less. And this time they were building something that didn't need permission to matter. The envelope came by courier, thick and official-looking, with her name typed in all caps across the front. Evelyn stared at it for a long time before slicing it open with the edge of a screwdriver. Inside, the legal language was cold and deliberate. Defamation, intentional harm to public image, damages sought, $2.5 million. Blake Whitmore, it seemed, had not taken kindly to Evelyn's truth being printed in black and white for the world to read. "He's suing me," she said aloud, the words heavy but steady. Caleb looked up from the workbench, his hands still wrapped in engine grease. For what? Telling the truth? "He says I ruined his reputation, that I fabricated everything in the article to make him look bad." She tossed the papers onto the table, jaw tight. Apparently, choosing peace over performance counts as a personal attack now. Caleb walked over, scanning the letter without a word. After a moment he looked at her, calm and unshaken. "You gonna let him silence you?" She shook her head. Not this time. The old Evelyn might have panicked, called her father's lawyer, tried to settle quietly, but that version of her was long gone. This Evelyn had grease under her nails and truth in her voice, and she wasn't about to back down. She contacted a local attorney, one who didn't charge $900 an hour or wear cufflinks, and together they crafted a statement. It wasn't loud or flashy, just honest. "I did not run away to destroy someone. I left to save myself. The truth may be inconvenient, but it's mine, and I won't apologize for it." The media picked it up instantly. Some called it brave, others reckless. But Evelyn didn't flinch. She kept working, teaching, showing up at the garage every morning with her sleeves rolled and her head high. Blake wanted to scare her back into silence, but all he did was prove why she left in the first place. This time the story wasn't about a runaway bride. It was about a woman who stood her ground and refused to be erased. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood, with the kind of hush that made even whispers feel loud. Reporters filled the pews, notebooks in hand, cameras stashed just outside the door, waiting. The whispers followed Evelyn all the way to the witness stand, a ripple of speculation and curiosity. She wore no designer labels this time, just a plain blouse, a black skirt, and boots still dusty from the garage. Caleb sat in the front row, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He didn't say anything when she walked in, but his eyes never left her. She carried that look with her, like armor. Blake's lawyer asked questions with the sharpness of someone who thought money was the same as truth. He painted her as unstable, dramatic, someone desperate for attention. He quoted her interview back at her like it was a script she'd written for sympathy. But Evelyn didn't waver. When it was her turn to speak, the room leaned in. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. "I didn't leave because I wanted to hurt Blake," she said, voice clear. "I left because I was losing myself. I was living a life that looked perfect on paper and felt hollow in my chest." She glanced briefly at Caleb, his steady presence like a lighthouse through fog. "I didn't destroy Blake's reputation. I shared my experience. If that truth is uncomfortable, maybe it's because it wasn't as perfect as it looked." The judge listened. The jury listened. Even Blake, for once, went silent. By the end of the day, Evelyn's statement made headlines, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. The case didn't go Blake's way. The court ruled there was no defamation, only a woman reclaiming her story. Outside, as flashes from cameras lit the courthouse steps, Caleb waited near the curb, arms crossed, expression calm. Evelyn walked straight to him, past the press, past the questions, and into the only place she truly trusted. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "We did." And she meant every word. The verdict came down just after noon. No damages, no defamation, no more silence. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom like a door unlocking, slow and final. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She simply exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for far too long. Outside, the cameras flared, but her steps were steady. The reporters called her name, begged for statements, but she kept walking. Caleb held the truck door open, and she climbed in without hesitation. They didn't speak on the ride back to Maple Ridge. They didn't have to. The silence between them was full of understanding, full of peace. Later, she sat alone behind the garage, her boots kicked off, toes in the dirt, watching the sun start to dip behind the trees. Caleb was inside, tinkering with a carburetor that didn't really need fixing, giving her space. He always knew when to be there, and when to let her breathe. She thought about how easy it would have been to run, to disappear into the comfort of money and lawyers and controlled narratives. But she hadn't. Not this time. She'd stood up, looked the storm in the eye, and told it to wait its turn. That was the real victory. The town buzzed, of course. Some cheered for her. Others waited for her to fall. But Evelyn didn't measure herself by their volume anymore. Her worth wasn't up for debate. That night, Caleb brought her a grilled cheese sandwich and a beer, setting it beside her without a word. She smiled up at him. "You ever think it had come to this?" she asked. He shrugged. "Didn't know what it had come to. Just knew I wanted you to have the choice." She leaned her head against his shoulder, warm and steady beside her. "I didn't just win in court," she murmured. "I won me back." Caleb didn't say anything. He just took her hand in his, dirt and grease and all, and held it like he'd always planned to. No headlines, no noise, just truth, and the quiet strength that followed. The back room of the garage didn't look like much at first. Just 2 workbenches, a stack of tools, and walls that still smelled faintly of old rubber and dust. But on a breezy Saturday morning, the space came alive in a way it never had before. 12 teenage girls filed in, some eager, others skeptical, all of them curious. They wore jeans, ponytails, chipped nail polish, and nervous smiles. Most had never touched a wrench in their lives. All of them had been told at some point that this wasn't their space. Now it was. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching quietly as Evelyn moved between the girls, showing them how to grip a socket wrench, how to recognize stripped threads, how to listen to an engine instead of just looking at it. They called the program Wrenched. A little messy, a little fierce, just like the girls it welcomed. There were no uniforms, no grades, just hands-on learning, encouragement, and a simple rule: ask questions, make mistakes, try again. One girl stripped a bolt. Evelyn gave her a high five. "Good, now you know how not to do it. Next time, you'll nail it." Laughter followed, real, unfiltered. By noon, the workbenches were cluttered with tools and snack wrappers. Elbows were greasy, foreheads smudged, but the pride on those faces, untouchable. At the end of the day, Evelyn leaned against the wall beside Caleb, watching the last of the girls walk out, shoulders straighter than when they arrived. "Think it worked?" she asked. Caleb gave a soft smile. "They didn't want to leave. That's a good sign." She nodded, wiping her hands. "I never thought this would be my life." "You mean covered in engine oil with teenagers fighting over torque specs?" She laughed, bumping her shoulder into his. "Exactly." But beneath the humor was something deeper. She wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't escaping. She was building. Wrenched wasn't just a program. It was proof that girls could learn, that lives could change, and that a runaway bride could finally stop running by teaching others how to stand. The envelope was small, the handwriting uneven, like the pen had been held with hesitation and hope. Evelyn found it tucked between the bills on the garage's front counter, stamped from a town 2 hours away. No return address. Just her name written in soft, blocky letters. She sat on the back steps to read it, the afternoon sun warm on her shoulders and the sound of Caleb's tools clinking softly behind her. Dear Evelyn, I don't know you, not really. But I saw your story. I watched your interview. I read everything I could. I'm 16. My dad thinks girls don't belong in garages. My school doesn't offer shop class to anyone but the boys. I've always wanted to learn. But I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to. Then I saw you, in boots, with grease on your face, laughing like it belonged there. You gave me courage, not just to pick up a wrench, but to tell my dad that I will, that I don't need to be perfect, I just need to try. Thank you for showing us we don't have to be perfect to be powerful. A girl who's not afraid anymore. Evelyn read it 3 times before folding it back with care, her fingers trembling around the creases. There had been interviews, headlines, a court case, but none of them had hit her like this. She walked inside and pinned the letter above the workbench in the wrench room, where the girls could see it, proof that what they were doing mattered. Caleb wandered over, wiping his hands. Good news? She nodded, blinking fast. The best kind. He read the letter in silence, then met her gaze. That's one hell of a legacy you're building. It's not mine alone, she said. But something settled in her chest then. A weight, but a good one. Responsibility, purpose. A reminder that the moment she stopped running, someone else found the courage to start walking forward, and that made every scraped knuckle, every whispered judgment, every hard day worth it. The offer came in a white envelope with a silver seal, heavy, official, and lined with everything Evelyn used to believe mattered. Her father's handwriting was absent, but the letter was unmistakably his voice, structured, persuasive, and dressed in layers of control disguised as opportunity. Executive Director of Brand Strategy at Carrington Enterprises, high 6-figure salary, travel, a corner office with glass walls and skyline views, a return to the world she once belonged to. Caleb found her sitting on the shop's front stoop, letter open in her lap, hands still stained from teaching the girls how to bleed brakes. They really want you back, huh? He asked gently. They want the version of me who left, she replied. The one who smiled for photos and never asked why things felt so empty. He sat beside her, stretching out his legs, letting the silence settle. You thinking about taking it? Evelyn looked around. The garage buzzed with life behind them, music playing low, laughter echoing from the wrench room where 2 girls argued over lug nuts, the scent of grease and freedom in the air. I thought I'd feel torn, she said. But I'm not. She held up the letter, then folded it neatly and tucked it back into the envelope. This used to be the dream, but now it feels like walking backward. Caleb didn't say much. He didn't have to. The quiet between them had always said more than words. Inside, Evelyn posted a new sign on the bulletin board. Wrenched, now accepting applications for fall session. In her handwriting, on her terms. She wasn't running from anything anymore, not expectation, not pressure, not her last name. For the first time, she wasn't waiting for someone else to decide her future. She already had. And it looked like oil-streaked coveralls, girls learning to take up space, and a love that never asked her to shrink. No skyline view could compete with that. It was late, one of those quiet nights where the sky stretched wide and the air carried a softness that made the world feel smaller. Caleb and Evelyn sat on the roof of the garage, legs dangling over the edge, sipping from chipped mugs of lukewarm coffee as the hum of the town settled into sleep. He rarely talked about himself, not the way she had. He was steady, dependable, a man who fixed things without drawing attention to what was broken in him. But tonight felt different. The silence between them wasn't a wall. It was an invitation. My dad was a mechanic too, Caleb said finally, eyes on the gravel below. Owned a place like this, only smaller. Mom handled the books, did the front office. They barely scraped by, but they loved it, loved each other. Evelyn listened, quiet, not interrupting. When I was 17, we lost everything. Dad got sick. Medical bills piled up. We sold the shop, then the house. Mom passed 6 months after him. I think she died of trying to stay strong too long. Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd known he carried something, but not this. I swore I'd rebuild what they lost, he continued. Not the business, the safe place. A space where no one had to prove they were enough just to be seen. That's what this garage is. That's what Wrenched is becoming. He rubbed the back of his neck, a small crack in his calm. I don't say it often, but I was lonely. Even when this place was full of engines and customers. It wasn't until you walked in, drenched, pissed off, in that ridiculous wedding dress, that it started to feel like home again. Evelyn set her mug down and reached for his hand. "You saved me, Caleb," she said gently. "But I think I'm saving you right back." He didn't reply, just nodded once, eyes shining in the dark. And for the first time, the man who never asked for anything leaned in, just enough to let someone hold the weight for a while. And Evelyn did, without flinching. The Mustang sat half-repaired in the middle of the garage, its hood propped open, wires exposed like nerves mid-healing. Caleb leaned over the engine, hands smudged, brow furrowed, not from the work but from something heavier pressing behind his ribs. Evelyn stood nearby, organizing sockets back into their trays, humming softly under her breath. She had no idea what was coming. Caleb wiped his hands and cleared his throat. "You ever think about where all this is going?" She glanced up, one eyebrow raised. "The car or us?" He chuckled. "Both, I guess." She leaned back against the tool bench, watching him. "Well, the Mustang's getting there. And us. I think we already are." He nodded, then stepped around the car, standing in front of her. No suit, no spotlight, no kneeling, just the raw hum of a garage, and two people who'd already said more with their actions than most say with vows. "I don't have much," he said, voice steady but low. "I can't give you diamonds or fancy trips or a life that fits in a magazine spread. But if you'll stay, if you'll keep waking up here, keep building this life with me, I'll spend every day earning you." Evelyn didn't blink, didn't need time, because love didn't always show up in candlelight and grand gestures. Sometimes it stood in work boots, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, offering everything it had with calloused hands and quiet certainty. She stepped forward, closed the small distance between them, and pressed her forehead to his. "You already do." He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "No ring?" she teased gently. He smiled. "Not yet. But I've got a washer from a '78 Bronco that might work until we can afford one." Evelyn laughed. Full, free home. She didn't need a diamond. She needed this. And she said yes with more certainty than she'd ever known. Right there, next to the Mustang, under the hum of old lights, their future began with oil on their hands and love in their bones. The garage never looked more alive. String lights hung from rafters, casting a warm glow over the tool benches and oil-stained floors. The scent of motor oil mingled with wildflowers, and the old radio in the corner played a slow, scratchy tune that somehow felt exactly right. There were no pews, just folding chairs, wooden crates, and a few beat-up shop stools arranged in rows along an aisle of swept concrete and faint tire tracks. Friends from town filled the space, grease under their nails and hearts full. The girls from Wrenched had made bouquets out of scrap metal and wire, twisting them into petals and stems that somehow looked more beautiful than anything bought from a store. Caleb stood at the front, hair combed for once, wearing a clean flannel shirt and jeans that still had a patch of paint from a job 2 summers ago. He looked like himself. That was the point. Then the garage doors creaked open. Evelyn stepped through, sunlight catching the edges of her dress, simple, knee-length, and stained with a smear of grease on the hem no one dared clean. Her boots tapped against the floor with quiet purpose, and her smile, full, soft, steady, wasn't the polished one from society pages. It was real, rebuilt, hers. She walked past engine lifts and half-done projects, past friends who'd become family, and toward the man who had never once asked her to be anything but exactly who she was. Caleb's eyes never left her. When she reached him, he took her hands, fingers still stained faintly with work. No rings in sight, just two washers, polished and tied with thin twine, slipped onto fingers with laughter and tears in equal measure. The vows were simple. No grand speeches, just promises made from people who'd already lived through enough to know what mattered. And when they kissed, the room cheered, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. A runaway bride, a mechanic with calloused hands, a garage turned chapel, and an aisle made of tire tracks that led not to a fantasy, but to a life they'd built together. One bolt, one breath, one brave day at a time. The old garage still stood, a little rustier at the edges, a little quieter now that the wrench room ran itself. The sign above the bay door had faded under years of sun, but the name was still visible beneath the flaking paint. Wrenched. The heart of Maple Ridge hadn't changed much. Neither had Evelyn, except now her boots were smaller, her hair streaked with silver, and she had a little girl sitting cross-legged on the back steps, eyes wide with curiosity. "Tell me again," the girl said, brushing a curl from her cheek. "The story about how you and Dad met." Evelyn smiled, setting down the mug in her hand and stretching her legs. "You really want to hear it again?" The girl nodded with a grin. "I like the part where you walk into the garage in your wedding dress." Evelyn chuckled. "I didn't walk, I stumbled. The rain had ruined my hair, my makeup was a mess, and I'd lost a heel somewhere on the road. I looked more like a disaster than a bride." "But he helped you anyway." "No," Evelyn said, her voice softening. "He didn't help me. He handed me a wrench. He gave me the space to figure out how to help myself." The girl tilted her head. "Why'd you run away?" Evelyn looked out across the gravel lot where the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. "Because I realized I was living a life that wasn't mine. I was about to marry someone who didn't see me, not really, and in the middle of that chaos, my car broke down in front of the only man who didn't ask for anything but the truth." The girl was quiet for a moment, and then you stayed. "I stayed," Evelyn said, "because sometimes life doesn't start when you have everything figured out. Sometimes it starts when you break down, when you stop running, when you turn around." Their daughter leaned against her, small hand wrapped around Evelyn's wrist. "So, you found yourself in reverse?" Evelyn nodded, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I drove away to get free, but I found my life and your dad the moment I stopped.